Years ago, I was listening to AFR radio, something I used to do all the time. I always had it playing in the background when I was home. So when I would be doing stuff around the house, cooking, cleaning, whatever, it was always playing. I had a radio set up in the dining room, and it would just stay on that one station. And one night I was listening to it, and it was what used to be Focus on the Family, but they changed it to something else. But they were going back through their archives to when it was Focus on the Family. And they were doing a kind of best of week where they were airing their most popular broadcasts. Well, one story in particular was called A Man Called Norman. And I remember listening to that, and by the time it was over, I was crying. That story just really touched my heart. And over the years, I'll pull it down, dust it off, and listen to it again. And I've been wanting to make a video presentation of it, and I just felt really moved tonight to do that. But of all the videos I could have worked on, I just felt really compelled to share this story. And I wanted a picture that would perfectly personify this character that the story's about. So I was Googling all these pictures of old men, old scruffy men, homeless men, trying to find keywords to bring up these images. And I was just poring over all these images. I just couldn't find the right one. It had to be a man. You could tell he was on hard times. You can tell he was challenged. But in his eyes, there would be like a childlike innocence. There would be a kindness in his eyes. And I think I finally found the closest image that I could that I think fits perfectly. And so that's the picture you're going to see on your screen as you're listening to the story. I'm not going to get into what the story is about. I'm going to let the story speak for itself. But I am going to end this intro with a Bible verse that is kind of the moral of the story. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and all your soul and with all your mind and with all your strength. The second is this: love your neighbor as yourself. There is no command greater than these. Mark 12, 30, 31. I hope this story blesses you as it has me over the years. I want to thank my subscribers. You guys are awesome. And we know that there's truth videos out there that can wait till tomorrow. The CV thing, the Vax thing, the latest on what's going on, it's not going anywhere. It'll be in your feed tomorrow. So just take this break with me. Listen to this touching story. And then we'll tackle the rest later. Let's just take a break tonight. And let's remember a very important lesson that God wants us to understand in a very touching story.
We prayed about what house to buy, and we bought a house. God led us to it, got us a marvelous deal on it. It's the kind of house I loved. It's an old house that I could work on and fix up. first thing I did, I said, I just see in my mind what this house was going to look like when I got finished. Didn't look that way now, but when I finished, and I started with the lawn out in the front, there was just an old tree that had rotted and fell down, and I was going to fill in that little hole in the ground, and just, there was still a little bit of a stump. I was going to cut that out, fill the hole in, make it nice and smooth. I forgot, since we prayed, I forgot to check first to see who lived around me. Because I trusted the Spirit of God, that He would take care of those little things like that. And I'm going to tell you who lived right around the house I bought. On my left was a Catholic couple, their family. And on my right, I told you just backwards. On my right was a Catholic couple. On my left was a retired Methodist preacher. We became dear friends. And right across the street was a widow lady. And next door to her is the one I want to tell you about. It was an old, we used to, when his kids called them old haunted looking houses. Now we had a fellow in our town that everybody used to laugh at. Not everybody, you know what I mean, but generally, and the kids, we'd throw snowballs at him in the wintertime. He was weird. He was strange, he was, a lot of people call him your town jokes. They're in every town, I notice. This fellow's name was Norman. Old Norman. He was 6'2" thereabouts, and he wore an old felt-looking hat that had so much dirt and oil in it you couldn't tell what it looked like originally. Wore overalls that were just grease-soaked. He had old house shoes that he'd flop around town in, sometimes rubber galoshes, and they just flopped when he walked up and down the street. And he'd walk real fast up and down Main Street like this, and real fast, and then he'd stop and he'd talk to himself. I said, hey. And he'd do that all over Main Street. And people would say, boy, he's weird, isn't he? I didn't even think anybody lived there at first. And that day that I was out there working on my tree stump, going to fix the yard, in my coveralls, barefoot, my wife and kids had gone uptown to the grocery store or something. I'm digging around the tree stump, going to saw it out. And I look over there. He walked out of that house, and I saw that he lived there, and I said, oh, no. I said, Lord, that's weird Norman over there. I said, you had me by the house across the street from weird Norman. I said, now, Lord, I don't know exactly what's wrong. We hear a lot of rumors, but I got 2 daughters, and sometimes I got to be, and he's strange. Hey, he might harm them, I thought. And so I watched him. He came down to come out to the sidewalk and go uptown or somewhere, and I said, hi, Norman. He looked at me, and he went, and took off down the street. A couple of days later, I was out there working on the same tree stump. He came out again. This time, he came out to work on his lawnmower out in the backyard. Something was wrong with it. It wouldn't run. He worked with it. He looked like he was getting disgusted, and I was watching him. I thought, boy, he really is strange. And then he did something that I'll never forget for eternity. He stood up as tall as he could. He looked like the Incredible Hulk. He raised his arms. He looked at me. He glared at me, and he ran from the back of his yard where I could just see him out to the side of the house, down the side of the house, right at me, stopping at his sidewalk. Praise God. He ran at me and screamed at the top of his lungs. He went, ah! My heart was going, I had a little tool in my hand my brother-in-law made in the shop class at the high school. Had given it to me, and I remember saying, now, Lord, I know we're supposed to love everybody, but if he comes over here, Lord, I'm going to defend myself. He went back to the lawnmower, and he fooled around with it a little more, got angry some more, ran at me again, stopped at his sidewalk. Every time, 3 times he did that, 3 times he stopped at his sidewalk. Suddenly, the presence of the Lord settled all over me. It seemed that faith or confidence, so I don't know the right word, more than I normally possessed, it began to well up in me, and I did something that surprised even me. I got up, barefoot, coveralls, walked across that street, and walked up to Norman in his backyard by his lawnmowers. I said, you having trouble with your lawnmower, Norman? He looked at me, and he said, you having trouble with your lawnmower, Norman? I said, I just said that. I said, I'm not much of a lawnmower mechanic, Norman. And I heard him say, I'm not much of a mechanic, Norman. As I looked at him. Cleaned a spark plug, tightened a screw or two. I don't know anything about a lawnmower. And I prayed and pulled that rope, and it ran like it'd been to the repair shop. Just hummed, just... And he did something for the first time I saw when he grinned real big. I saw a green and yellow tooth right here. And I saw one over here and one here and one here. And those spectacles he had on looked like Coke bottles. They were thick and he had whiskers, had that old hat. But there he was grinning at me. And after that, every time he'd come out of the house and I'd say, "Hi, Norman," he'd go, "Hello." And then he'd take off down the street. Men in my town said, reckon what's the matter with Norman? Well, he's in the barber shop. You know, that's where you find out things in town. And especially our small town. And one fellow said, "I know what it is. Norman was hit by a Greyhound bus once, I heard." Another fellow said, No, Fred, that's not it at all. What happened to Norman was he was brilliant. He was a genius. Everybody in the barber shop was... He said, in fact, he was such a genius that his mind exploded one day. But God didn't care about all that. He said to me, by beginning to put a little seed of a seed way down here deep in my heart for the first time, he said, "Witness Jesus to him." Well, okay, Lord, One night after church, it is tradition in our town to go to the Dairy Queen. And the scene was always the same. You know, whoever got out first, whoever had the 20-minute service got there first, got their ice cream, sat down. Then the church that had the 25-minute service, they followed, and they got there next, they got their ice cream. They always waved at one another. "Hi, Bill. Hi, John. Hi, Betty. How's your family?" "Fine." "How was church?" "Oh, wonderful." Never had heard anybody have a bad service. And everybody be waving and smiling in the Dairy Queen. And everybody be eating their ice cream. I've done it myself. I'm not saying anything about my neighbors I wouldn't say about myself. I was doing it myself. I was sitting there eating ice cream one night, and I was smiling at everybody. Guess who walked in right in the middle of all that? Thank you. He comes, gets his ice cream cone. He always sits there right in the same seat. And every Christian in the place, especially Brother Mike, who travels around the country lifting up Jesus and singing adoration, I rushed over to him and gave him the 4 spiritual laws. No. I did what everybody else did. I act like I didn't see him. We gave him room. We didn't talk about him or to him about Jesus. I've always wondered why, now that I tell this story, I thought, well, I guess it's because if somebody saw me talking to him, they might think I'm as strange as he is. And the Spirit of the Lord spoke to me and said, quietly, and don't make a show out of it, go over and tell him about Jesus. I said, Carmel, pray for me. I'm going to go talk to Norman. She's getting used to that kind of action, and she prayed, and I went over there, and I sat down, and real quick, and I said, "Hi, Norman, you remember who I am?" He said, "You remember who I am?" I said, "Norman, listen, I'm your neighbor." He said, "I'm your neighbor." And he looked at me out of those eyes, out of those thick glasses. And I said, "Norman, do you know who Jesus is?" He said, "Do you know who Jesus is?" I said, because people were beginning to look, I said, "Norman, did you ever think about asking Jesus to come into your heart and your life?" He never repeated me. For the first time, he said, "I've given it serious consideration." I was shocked. A couple nights later, the Lord said, 700 Club's going to have an extra special good program on tonight. Invite Norman. Hey, Norman, you want to come over tonight and watch television? 700 Club got a big come on. Well, the Lord wanted to witness to him. He said, okay. He dressed up for us that night. He didn't take a bath. He didn't put on different clothes. He put on an old string tie that somebody had given him. Hung about like that, and here he come across the street that night. And he come up the steps, and he came in the house. And the Lord said, get him there where he can see, because he's got those glasses, and I want to witness to him. And I said, Norman, come on in. We're really glad to have you tonight at our house. Lied. I said, sit down over here in my chair. He sat down in my chair, and he watched 700 Club. He was witness to. My wife sat back here, and I sat back here, and we watched him watch 700 Club. And after a while, he got up and said, thank you very much. And he started out the door, and I went over and turned the light on for him. I said, watch the steps now. Good night, Norman. Good night now. Come back. And good night. Closed the door. I ran in the house, ran over to my chair. I looked at my chair. There wasn't a spot on it. It was like no one had ever sat there. It was clean. My wife sprayed a little bit of stuff in the air, and the house smelled real good, and we couldn't even tell he'd been there. A few days later, the Lord said, take him somewhere with you. I said, hey, Norman, you ever go to the St. Louis baseball game? Busch Stadium, St. Louis? No, like to. I said, we'll go. Picked him up just a few days later. It was hot weather by this time. He come out with one of the longest wool tweedy looking winter coats on you've ever laid eyes on. It touched him about his shoes, and he's big, tall. He looked like the gray ghost when he come out of the house. I said, Norman, you're not going to need that coat. It's hot, you know. We're going to be outdoors. There's no, and it's the sun just, and you leave. And he said, I want to wear my. I said, Norman, you're not. Get in the car, Norman. Turned the air conditioner wide open, headed up the interstate to St. Louis. He kept looking at that CB radio. Finally, I said, talk on that thing. Here, push that button and talk. I said, hey, man. Breaker, we got a fella here never had a CB, never been around one before. He mows lawns around our town for a living, and he cleans ashes out of the furnaces in the wintertime. I said, let's give him a name, give him a nickname. Somebody said, well, he'd be the old grass cutter. And he just, and I said, here, old grass cutter, talk to him. He said, hello? It's the old grass cutter. And he was fascinated. He got to St. Louis at the ball game. We parked in the parking area. And when we got out of the car, I figured out a plan. I said, Norman, I'm not going in the ball game with you if you wear that stupid old coat. And when he took it off, I saw why he was wearing it. He had on 2 pair of dress pants that were split, both of them, all the way up the back. I said, put your coat back on, Norman. We went in the ball game. We turned that turnstile and walked in, and the first guy we saw was a little old guy with a T-top on. He had shorts on right here. He didn't have a muscle on his body, but he thought he did. He had hair that stood out like a Brillo pad. He had a transistor radio great big under this arm. He had a big cup of something to drink in this arm, and he was bebopping in the ball game. He looked at Norman, never batted an eye. Looked at me a little strange. We got in. Norman didn't watch the game at all. He watched the crowd. 30,000 people. He said, could I have a hot dog? I gave him a hot dog and then another one and then 10 more, and I gave him soda and peanuts. I never seen a machine eat like that. He just ate and ate and ate. And the 7th inning got there, and I forgot it was the 7th inning. Everybody in the place stood up to stretch, and I said, oh, yeah, Norman. By this time, I had told him, because it was hot, he was perspiring. I said, just take your coat down and drape it over the seat. Sometime back around the 3rd inning or so, and he draped it over the seat, and he was much more comfortable. But now it was the 7th inning, and we were standing all over the park, and I said, stand up, Norman, let's stretch. And we were just stretching away. And all of a sudden, I happened to glance behind me. The guy behind me was going. I said, sit down, Norman, sit down, sit down. It'd been a busy year. I've been working at the coal mine, and I was tired, and I've been singing in churches on the weekend, and I was telling the Lord about, because my vacation was coming up, and you know what the Lord told me? He said, why don't you take Norman with you on vacation? I said, I'm going to Opryland, Lord. Norman at Opryland and he said, I said, Lord, I'm not going to do it now. Sir, I'm tired, and a couple of weeks later, we was going down the highway to Opryland, Norman sitting beside me, my wife and kids in the back. I noticed something about him. He was beginning to be relaxed around people. He was beginning to be less nervous, and he didn't talk to himself as much as he had before. We got to Opryland, and I didn't put him on the Wabash Cannonball, because he's about 62 years old at the time, and I was afraid he might have a heart problem over that, So I tried to pick out a ride he could handle, and I found the bumper cars. We got him in there, and he sat down in that big old bumper car, and he got everybody in the place caught over to one side. They turned that right on. He had the whole crowd pinned, and he had his car sideways, and they had them jammed in over there, and they were mad. And he was looking around going, and looking at me going, and he couldn't figure it out. We began to laugh, and we were standing outside that place. Tears began to run out. I said, look, Carmen, look at old Norman. He's got them, everyone caught over there, and the kids were going, oh. And finally, somebody got loose. And the ride was about half over, and they felt like they'd been cheated, and they were in a hurry. They came all the way around that rink, and they wanted to hit somebody before that ride was over. And there sat Norman, and they hit him full speed ahead. He went, oh, and then he really tried to get that thing going. And here comes someone else, and they were starting to get loose now in great numbers, and one by one, they'd come around and they'd hit Norman. And the Spirit of the Lord spoke to me at Opryland. And he said, that's what they've been doing to Norman all his life. People been hitting on him. They've been hitting on him. When they throw snowballs at him, like he's not a human being, they hit on him. When they bring him old junky clothes they wouldn't wear anymore themselves, they hit on him. And then he said something I'll never forget. He said, that's what my children do, my children, to one another. They get mad because they can't play the piano or the organ, or they can't teach their favorite Sunday school class, or they gossip about the preacher, or they gossip about some lady or some man. And then he reminded me of the 13th chapter, 1 Corinthians. Though I speak with the tongues of men and angels, though I have all faith so I could remove mountains, understand all mysteries, if I have no charity, love, I need another cassette tape, another book. No, it says, I am nothing. I had taken Norman an old suit of mine that I didn't wear anymore. God brought that to my attention, and I went over and looked in this closet, and I couldn't believe my eyes. Old shoes of every description you can imagine, old suits, sweaters that hung this way, all kinds of ties, bolos, sparkly ties, big wide ties, little ties, nothing that anyone would want to wear. I said, God, give me an opportunity to bless me some way, Lord. And a revival to sing at came in, and I know they gave me an offering at the end of the revival, and the Lord said, buy Norman a suit. I went downtown, I bought one of the nicest suits I could find. I made sure it cost at least more than any suit I own in my wardrobe, and I went to get him and take him, and he picked it out. He liked it. It was kind of dark blue. He had good taste. It had little stitching around here. It was polyester. It was nice. It was expensive. And I said, Norman, you ever been clean? He said, it's been years. He said, I'm a hermit, you know. My dad got killed in the coal mines about 50 years ago. Went to work one day. I was just a little boy, and he didn't come home. Some men came to our house and said the roof fell in on him. I remember his funeral. I saw my uncle. Haven't ever seen him again. I said, Norman, I'm going to run some water for you in your bathtub, and I really want you to get clean, because tonight I want to take you down to a church that's having a gospel singing. Went in his bathroom. I couldn't believe my eyes. Pulled the curtain back. Oh, the floor was like dirt. The tub was so filthy I had to take all the sacks out of it. First, he saved paper sacks. I didn't know why. I took them all out, and then I cleaned the tub with SOS pads, and when I turned the hot water faucet on, it fell in the tub, and I got it back up and taped it back on, and got it. It leaked a little, but it worked all right. And I got his hot water ran in there, and I went in and I said, now, Norman, see, you got a new white shirt and a tie to go with your suit, and you got new shoes and socks and underclothes, and let's really get clean. I mean, you know, really. And I said, when you're through, holler at me, okay? He went in there in the bathroom, and I went in the living room. Look at that unbelievable house he lived in. Wallpaper sagging, rain had got in, falling off the walls and the ceiling. And dirt everywhere. He had an old coal furnace that belched smoke in the wintertime. Something was wrong with it. I don't know how he lived at night when he turned that on in the wintertime. Sometimes he didn't use it. I saw that he had several covers on his bed. He'd just crawl under, and that old mattress was like that. And I shook the curtain, and dust just came out. And I said, while he was in there in the bathtub, I heard him in there. He was in there soaping. He was beginning to sing. He finally said, I'm okay, I'm ready, I'm clean. I went in there and I pulled that curtain back. I told him to get out of the tub and just put a towel around him. There he stood. His glasses were off, water dripping in the floor, and with a towel around him. And I looked at him, and have you ever seen mud that had just been smeared? I said, not clean enough, Norman. Why don't you get back in the tub? Now, Norman, I'm serious. Now get clean. We want to be... and went back in the living room, looked at the hallway, went back in after he said he was okay. That went on time and time again. Finally, the floor was wet, the mirror was wet, the tub was wet, I was wet, he was wet. But when he got finished, I had scrubbed his head. I got him down like this. I didn't hurt him, but I got him in a headlock where he couldn't get away. I got an SOS. I got some lava soap, and I got a sponge, and I began to rub the top of his head, and I rubbed it, and he'd go, I rubbed it, and pretty soon I looked, and there was a bunch of white showing through. He had beautiful white hair. I scrubbed some more. I said, put your face up here. And he went. And I scrubbed his face, and I gave him the sponge. I said, all right, big boy, from the neck on down, it's yours. Get it clean. When we got finished, water all over the place, you could rub your thumb on him anywhere, and he'd squeak. We went downtown to the church, to the gospel singing. We sat down. People come up to me and say, well, Brother Mike, we're really glad to have you visiting here tonight. God bless you. And who's your friend? And about the time they'd get his hand, I'd say, that's Norman. And they'd go. One Sunday right after that, the Spirit of the Lord spoke to me and said, today is Norman's day. Take a Bible. Get a pastor friend. We went over to Norman's. We got the book of Romans, and we began to tell him how we've all come short of the kingdom of God, how he could receive salvation. At first he didn't understand, and then he grasped it. He said to me, oh, I see what you mean. He said, I used to listen when I was a little boy to the radio. My mom would play, that preacher was on, and he said, you mean like my windows right there are so dirty? And he said, you're saying that Jesus, if I'll ask him, will clean my heart up like sometimes when I wash my windows. And I said, yeah, Norman, he'll clean up inside of you and then the outside too. And he said, I would like that. In that old house with the wind blowing and cracks in the walls. Old dirty house. Norman prayed a simple prayer. And he said, Jesus, Mike said that if I'd ask you to, you'd come into my heart. And I'd like that. Come in. And he was washed white as snow. I rejoiced. And God began to do a work in him. But God began to do a work in me. I didn't mind if everybody in town knew I was helping Norman. I used to tell them down at the ball game a little bit during the intermission. A bunch of us guys would be standing around drinking a Coke, and I'd say, just to have a clear blue, I couldn't stand it anymore. I wanted to praise so bad for this little good deed I was doing. I said, I'm helping Norman. These guys would look at me like, huh? What do you think they're going to do in the second half, Fred? They're going to run the... And God said, that's not loving your neighbor as yourself. Now, folks, I want to tell you something. When I'm in a church that needs this message because they have a lack of love, I always mention to them that God is praised in a lot of places. Most Christians, generally speaking, love God, but not many love their neighbor as their self. I'm going to finish with this. And believe me, there's been 8 years or more now of this. It could go on all night long. I will not. I'll finish with this. I had pride in me. God still works on it. He said, are you willing to help Norman? No matter how long it takes. Are you willing to help him, take him places, make him a part of your life? Are you really willing? I said, oh God, he's so unlovely sometimes. He said, are you willing to go out there in the coal shed and bring his coal in when he can't carry it anymore and put it in his old Stoker-matic? And I said, there's no light out there, Lord, and sometimes the snow in Illinois is deep. And he had me do so many things in that house that it was beginning to be a routine, back and forth across the street. And one night he challenged me with what I want to close with. He said, in the bathroom one night, I was standing there looking at his bathroom. I had remodeled his bathroom by now, fixed his faucet, I fixed his sink, I got him some new... walls, and I put him a new Celotex ceiling in and had a light I was working on, and there's one thing in that bathroom that I just would not touch. It's over in a corner, and it's dirty. I just said, no. I said, now God, singing a choir? I'm singing choir. I love them. I love you all the time. But yeah, I do that. Travel all the country and sing and tell them about Jesus. Okay, Lord. Not that. He kept troubling me about it. I kept telling him no. I fought that thing. I said, no way. He said, all I want you to do is fix that ring and lid on the top of it. You see, if you look at it, and I did, it had the two bolts that held the ring into the ceramic part. One of those bolts had broken off, and if you accidentally bumped into it, it'd just swing down by that one bolt and hang beside the bowl. And he said, look over there. And I looked, and someone, and I'm going to ask him one of these days. I'm not brash towards our Father, but I'm going to ask him. I don't think he'll mind. I'm going to ask him who put that there. In a plastic bag was a brand new ring and lid. All I had to do was take a bolt off, take the old one off, throw it away, put the new one on, put the bolts on, and it was finished, but I wasn't going to touch it. Sat over in front of my television. One night, he troubled me so bad I couldn't watch television. I turned around to Carmel, my wife, and I just said, I'm not going to do it. She was looking at the Sears catalog or something. She looked at me like... I couldn't stand it. About an hour later, I went up and got my coveralls out of the pantry, and I put them on, put the collar up. I pulled the sleeves down, found me some gloves that came down over the sleeves. She laughed and told me later if I'd have had an operating mask like a surgeon, I'd have had that on. I got my toolbox, and I crept across the street real late, over into Norman's bathroom, got the tools out, started working on that thing. And that one bolt that was left, I just couldn't... I tried to get that box-end wrench on it, just wouldn't... And if I was God, and a guy was finally willing to do something like this... I'd just have him touch that thing. It'd come right off, wouldn't you? But it wouldn't do it. And finally, I tried to get as close as I could to it without touching it. You know, watch it. Watch it. And I'll tell you something. You got to hug one of them things to work on them. You know. And I just couldn't get it off. And so I know we're in a church and I'm going to trust God. He's got a good sense of humor, because here's what I finally had to do. It's true. I had to get down on that old filthy floor so I could see up under that thing. And I crawled, and I took that wrench, and I finally got it on that nut, and I moved it a little bit, and old rust and dirt just hit me right in the eye like that. I said, this ain't the 700 Club. This ain't PTL. And I began to have one of Jim's pity parties he was talking about. And the Spirit of the Lord took care of it. He spoke to me and said, right there on the floor, he said, when you do it unto the least of these, you do it unto me. It changed me. I didn't care if anybody noticed. I didn't want any money. I didn't want any acclamation for it. I didn't care anymore. I just began to see when it said, I'll give my body to be burned. But if I have not love, it's for nothing. I began to understand that word, loving your neighbor as yourself. I went back home and I said, God, what else will you have for me? He said, son, get in your car and take those songs that I've given you all over the country and leave them at radio stations. I think maybe he thought maybe I can trust him, maybe use him a little bit. And I went in the car all over the radio stations, and he opened up television, and suddenly record sales came in, and then doors opened to speak all over the country. But he never allowed any of that to happen in my life. Not the first bit of it. No matter how much I agonized with him for 35 years. No matter how much I hollered and said, why can't you use me, God? Why am I having to wait? Until he had taught me to love my neighbor as myself through my friend, my neighbor named Norman. He opened the doors, and today, one of the favorite things that I get to tell around the country, if it be in Indonesia or Holland or America, is the story of how God used the old man named Norman to teach me to love my neighbor as myself.
The truth is, Norman is in heaven today.
That's the truth.
and you were with him when he died. You continued your relationship with him right to the end, didn't you?
Yes, he spent his last 10 years in a nursing home, but it was necessary. He fell on the ice and snow and damaged his leg, the interior blood vessels and what have you. And so just to keep him alive, they put him in a nursing home. And for 10 years, I would visit him in that nursing home. And this last April, when he quietly, beautifully went to be with the Lord, I wasn't sure I was going to get to be there. I was on a ministry trip lasting about 10 days or so. I'd call home every day 3 or 4 times. Carmel, my wife, would give me an update on him. I got home, and the last 2.5 hours of his life I got to spend with him. Carmel and I were at his bedside. In fact, as he began to breathe much more slowly, peaceful the entire time, I experienced the most amazing presence of the Lord that I think I'd ever experienced in my life. It was an odd time, because off in the distance there in the nursing home, I heard a sitcom playing on television in someone's room that had it turned loudly. Probably they couldn't hear well. That sitcom was full of canned laughter as he was breathing his last breaths. So I just stroked his arm and I said, I love you. I said, tell Jesus hello for me. I didn't know if he could hear me, because I knew he was down to the last. This that I'm going to tell you will be the most difficult part of what I have to tell you. Out of his right eye, that eye alone, one tear ran down his cheek. And I knew he'd heard.